Welcome back. Well, more updates, of course, from that NUMSA strike as we go through the afternoon, but also underway at the moment, the interviews by the Judicial Service Commission for positions on several courts in the country. Now, the Judicial Service Commission finished its interviews for those two positions on the Constitutional Court yesterday, and then came up with the same shortlist of judges for President Cyril Ramaphosa that it came up with earlier this year. The interviews are being held again after Casac said it would go to court because of the way the JSC behaved the last time, when it did not have a proper process and commissioners asked judges, sitting judges, political questions. Well, how does Casac feel about this round of interviews? Lawson, Naidoo, the Executive Director of Casac. Lawson, good afternoon to you. So the interviews have been rerun. It's the same list of judges. How do you feel about that?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you very much. Look, I think we must look at yesterday's proceedings in two parts. Firstly, the actual conduct of the interviews themselves, which I think were a significant improvement on what we saw in April. The questions were fair, were directed at determining the suitability of candidates to hold judicial office by and large. Acting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo presided and ensured that candidates were treated fairly, that they were given relatively equal amounts of time in their interviews. And the process, as I say, was a vast improvement from April. But having said that, and the fact, as you've outlined, is that the same five candidates have been recommended to the President for appointment, from which he must choose two. And, you know, that part of the process is done behind closed doors in the closed deliberations of the Judicial Service Commission. And we therefore don't know the basis on which those five candidates were recommended and two were not. And I think in that regard, there are a couple of issues that arise. Firstly, is the absence of any clear criteria that is set up by the JSC with regards to how they will evaluate candidates that appear for them for appointments to all of the superior courts, not just the Constitutional Court. And that means that we're left to speculate as to the reasons why the JSC came to the conclusion that it did. The second important point, Stephen, though, is whilst the legislation says that the JSC can recommend or must recommend at least three more candidates than the number of vacancies that are to be filled. So in this case, there are two vacancies to be filled, and therefore they've nominated five. Now, there's nothing, in my view, that would have prevented the JSC from nominating or listing all seven candidates for the consideration of the President and allowing him to choose if they all meet the criteria of being fit and proper to hold judicial office. So what this seems to suggest is that the JSC is in effect saying that Judge David Unterhalter and Mr. Dodson are not suitable to hold office. And, that would be a concern if that is exactly what they're saying, because if they are indeed fit and proper, then the JSC cannot curtail the discretion of the President to appoint people who are fit and proper.
So in other words, what you're suggesting is you're happy with the way the interviews went, you're still scratching your head a bit as to the outcome.
Indeed, because we don't know the basis on which the outcome was reached, what the criteria that was used, how the candidates were evaluated against each other, and what were the particular factors that led the JSC to decide that those two candidates, Unterhalter and Dodson, were not suitable to be recommended to the President. Ultimately, the President decides from the list that is given to him by the JSC.
I mean, it's quite strange that it's the same shortlist. I get that it's by and large the same Judicial Service Commission, although it was chaired by a different person and there were one or two small changes for various reasons. But still, you would have thought maybe something would change, but they didn't.
No, they didn't. And, as I say, we don't know the reasons for that. We can merely speculate about that. And I think, given the public interest in this matter, it is perhaps incumbent upon the JSC to disclose at the very least the reasons for their decision, if not the full record of their deliberations.
The way the commissioners behave, now this is quite a complex area, so some of the commissioners, not the majority, just a few, are actually sitting politicians. There's a Justice Minister, they're members of Parliament. Now, one of the reasons that they're there, and I think this is probably a good reason, is that voters should be represented in this process in some way. Other democracies have politicians being involved in this process too. Do you think that the way in which that politicians are involved in the process is wrong after everything that's happened? Do you think we need to change it? Do you think it's fine, it should stay as it is? It was just a group of people who did not necessarily do what they should have done the first time round.
Well, I think, firstly we must say, the JSC is a unique institution in that it combines representatives from the three branches of government, from the judiciary itself, from the executive with the Minister of Justice and the four nominees that are made by the President who sit on the JSC, as well as you've highlighted, 10 members of Parliament in total, 6 from the National Assembly and 4 from the National Council of Provinces. And 3 of those 6 members from the National Assembly must be members of opposition parties. And they are there, as you rightly point out, Stephen, to represent the interests of the public at large in these hearings. They're not there representing their political parties, and they must take off their party hats when they enter this forum and conduct themselves in a manner that is envisaged in terms of the Constitution to determine the fitness and propriety of candidates to serve in judicial office. And, to therefore look at the issues of the independence, the integrity, the judicial track record, and other similar factors in coming to their decision, and not to seek to determine political affiliations or other personal matters of interest that have no bearing on a candidate's suitability for to become a judge. So I think that that a lot of that goes to the manner in which the process is chaired. And as I said, we saw a significant difference yesterday because the acting Chief Justice seemed to have a proper handle on proceedings and try to guide the questions in a way that would assist the JSC in its deliberations process. Whether that ultimately happened or not would remain in the dark, unfortunately. But, there is a broader issue that you raised, Stephen, is whether it's time to review the composition of the Judicial Service Commission as a whole. Do we need as many politicians represented there as we do? Given that we're now 27 years into our democracy, should we not include another category of people such as retired judges who have a very good understanding of the demands of sitting on the bench and of the different courts, the High Court, the SCA, as well as the Concourt, who can bring a different dimension to bear and perhaps assist us in enabling the JSC to become a more effective organ for selecting judges.
The Judicial Service Commission is still sitting this afternoon, actually sitting through the week because of the interviews for other positions on other courts. I presume you're watching that closely as well. Are you expecting them, the rest of the week to go as it did yesterday?
Well, I think we do. I haven't watched any of it today, I'm afraid, but I think the scene was set yesterday. The tone was set in many respects by the way the interviews were conducted yesterday, and I think the contestation for the apex court is obviously attracts a higher level of scrutiny than does other positions on other courts. But certainly we would hope that the conduct of the JSC this week is fairer to candidates and produces the best out of the candidates that appear before them, so that our courts are indeed staffed with people of high caliber, and ultimately that enhances respect for the judiciary and respect for the rule of law, which is after all a foundational provision or principle of our constitutional democracy.
Lawson, Naidoo, thanks very much indeed, Executive Secretary at the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution. I really do appreciate the time.